They say your life flashes before your eyes when you die. Mine didn't. All I got was the echo of their laughter. 27 accomplished diplomats, representing 12 different countries, and every last one of them was snickering, smirking, because I, Nadia Petrov, mid-level UN interpreter, had just butchered the English pronunciation of hegemony during the most critical nuclear disarmament summit of our time. The word caught in my throat, a jumble of misplaced stresses and a harsh Russian G, and the room, already tense, had seized the moment for a bit of comic relief at my expense. My face burned, my chest tightened, and my final fleeting thought as the undiagnosed aneurysm in my brain decided to spectacularly give way wasn't some profound realization about the universe or even a tender memory of my mother. Nope. It was simply, I hope they all choke on their fancy, overpriced bottled water. Then blackness, until it wasn't. I woke up with a gasp, disoriented. The ceiling was familiar, too familiar. Peeling wallpaper, a faded poster of some long-forgotten boy band. My childhood bedroom. My 17-year-old body, if the distinct lack of aches and the surprising tautness of my skin were any indication. But inside this teenage vessel was the 43-year-old me, complete with every memory, every nuance of the 7 languages I'd painstakingly mastered, every bitter taste of every professional slight. Disbelief warred with a strange, burgeoning sense of something. I fumbled for my phone. No, wait. No phone. Not like the sleek smartphone I'd had. I scrambled off the narrow bed, my legs feeling oddly gangly, and found it. My old, battered Nokia. Then, my eyes landed on a worn blue notebook on my desk. My childhood diary. With trembling hands, I flipped it open. The date, scrawled in my own loopy teenage handwriting, stared back at me. September 12th, 1997. A hysterical laugh bubbled up. I was back, 17 again, with 43 years of life and death packed into my brain. It wasn't a dream. I knew things. I knew the outcome of the upcoming Russian presidential election. I knew about the rise of the internet, the dot-com bubble, 9/11s. I could speak fluent French, German, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, and Japanese languages I wouldn't even begin to formally study for years in my previous life. A second chance. The universe, in its bizarre, unfathomable way, had hit the reset button. And this time, I wouldn't just be good. I'd be flawless. This time, no one would ever laugh at my accent again. This time, I would make them listen. The air in the UN conference room crackled. You could practically taste the tension, thick and metallic like the precursor to a thunderstorm. I was Nadia Petrov, 43, a seasoned interpreter, or so I like to tell myself. Mid-level, if I was being brutally honest. And today, mid-level felt like the bottom of a very deep, very dark well. Nuclear disarmament, the words themselves felt heavy, freighted with the fate of millions. The Russian delegate, a stern man with a face like a weathered map of Siberia, was speaking, his words clipped and forceful. The American delegate, all tailored suit and feigned affability, leaned forward, a slight smirk playing on his lips. My job was to bridge the chasm between them, to be the invisible conduit of meaning. I'd always been good at languages. They were my refuge, my escape. But English, particularly the precise, nuanced English of diplomacy, spoken with a native-sounding accent, had always been my Everest. My Russian accent, though softened over years of practice, still clung to me like a persistent shadow. It made me self-conscious, a weakness I tried to hide behind a wall of professional competence. Gospodin Pozol, my nie możemy soglasić z takim urovnem. Hegemonii, the Russian delegate stated, his voice firm. Mr. Ambassador, we cannot agree to such a level of hegemony. Simple enough, a standard diplomatic term. I opened my mouth, took a breath, and then it happened. The word, hegemony, it should have rolled off my tongue. Instead, it stumbled. Mr. Ambassador, we cannot agree to such a level of hegemony. The stress was wrong, dug too hard. A caricature of an English sound filtered through a thick Russian lens. A beat of silence. Then, a cough, quickly stifled. A rustle of papers. And then, the unmistakable sound of poorly concealed laughter. It started as a few snickers, then spread, a wave of smirks and sideways glances. 27 pairs of eyes, all focused on me not with respect, but with amusement. The American delegate's smirk widened into an actual grin. Even some on the Russian side looked down, embarrassed for me. My face felt like it was on fire. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pierced through me. My carefully constructed professional persona crumbled. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I could feel a strange pressure building behind my eyes, a throbbing in my temples. Rage, cold and impotent, simmered beneath the shame. "Excuse me," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. I tried to correct myself, to regain some semblance of composure, but the damage was done. The moment was lost, shattered by their casual cruelty. The throbbing in my head intensified, a blinding, searing pain. The room started to tilt. The laughter, though now subdued, seemed to reverberate, amplifying in my ears. It was the last thing I heard. Darkness, then light. Not the harsh, fluorescent light of the UN, but the soft, dim glow of a Moscow morning filtering through thin curtains. I was lying on a bed that felt too small, the sheets scratchy and familiar. My head didn't hurt. That was the first thing I noticed. The blinding pain was gone. I sat up, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't my apartment in New York. This was my childhood bedroom. The peeling floral wallpaper, the chipped white paint of the desk, the faded Keep Aloft poster on the wall, my teenage sanctuary. Panic seized me. Had I had a stroke? Was this some kind of elaborate hallucination? I swung my legs over the side of the bed. My body felt different, lighter, younger. I rushed to the small, cracked mirror above my dresser. The face staring back wasn't mine. Not the mine I knew. Not the 43-year-old woman with lines etched by stress and too little sleep. This was Nadia, 17 years old. Smooth skin, wide, startled eyes, a tangle of dark hair falling around my shoulders. "No," I whispered, my voice higher, younger. "This isn't possible." My mind raced, a whirlwind of confusion and dawning, terrifying understanding. I started testing myself. I recited, in perfect French, the opening lines of Proust's Remembrance of Things Past. I hadn't learned French until I was 25. I mentally conjugated irregular Spanish verbs, a skill acquired in my 30s. I pictured the skyline of Tokyo, a city I'd visited on a UN assignment just last year. Or 25 years from now? The memories were all there, crystal clear, a lifetime of experiences crammed into this teenage brain. I stumbled back to the desk, my gaze falling on the blue diary. My childhood diary. My fingers, strangely slender and unlined, trembled as I opened it. The last entry was dated September 11th, 1997. Today, according to the cheap digital clock on my nightstand, was September 12th, 1997. September 12th. The day I'd had that awful fight with Papa. The day I'd given up on my dream of studying abroad. The day I'd decided to enroll in the local university's mediocre linguistics program because it was safe, expected, and wouldn't upset the precarious balance of our family. The decision that had set me on the path to that conference room, to that humiliating mispronunciation, to that fatal aneurysm. A choked sob escaped me. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. I was 17 again, but with all the knowledge, all the skills, all the bitterness of my 43 years. I had been given a second chance. A plan, audacious and exhilarating, began to form in my mind. This time, things would be different. This time, I wouldn't settle. This time, I wouldn't be the one they laughed at. My knowledge of the future, of languages, of the world, it wasn't a burden, it was an arsenal, and I knew exactly how I was going to use it. The air in our small Moscow kitchen was thick with the smell of frying onions and unspoken disapproval. Mama was hovering by the stove, her back to me, a silent testament to her displeasure. Papa sat at the table, his newspaper spread open but unread, his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that used to make me shrink. "England?" he finally said, the word laced with incredulity. "You want to go to England? For linguistics? What's wrong with Moscow State University? It was good enough for your brother." In my first life, this was the point where I'd faltered. His disapproval, Mama's silent disappointment, the crushing weight of familial obligation, it had all been too much. I'd mumbled an apology, agreed that Moscow State was perfectly fine, and let my dreams quietly wither. Not this time. Moscow State is a good school, Papa, I said, my voice calm, a stark contrast to the tremor I felt inside. This 17-year-old body still reacted to him with a lifetime of ingrained fear, but the 43-year-old mind knew this was a battle I had to win. But Oxford has one of the best linguistics programs in the world. Professor Davies, his work on phonetics, it's revolutionary. I'd read his future papers, of course. I knew the impact his research would have. Papa scoffed. Oxford. And how do you propose we pay for this? Oxford. Financial constraints. That had been his trump card last time. We weren't poor, but we weren't wealthy either. The idea of international tuition fees was laughable. I'm applying for scholarships, I said. I've already started the applications. In truth, I'd spent the last 3 nights, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate hope, crafting the perfect personal essays, leveraging my future knowledge of what admissions committees would be looking for. I knew which academic trends would be in vogue, which research questions would be considered cutting edge. My applications weren't just good, they were prescient. Scholarships. Papa's laugh was harsh. Don't be naive, Nadia. Those are for geniuses, for the exceptionally connected, not for you. Not for you. The words, so casually cruel, echoed the laughter in that UN conference room. They were 2 sides of the same coin, the currency of my lifelong insecurity. A flash of my first life. Papa. After my graduation from Moscow State, his lukewarm handshake, his dismissive, well, at least you finished. Never a word of pride, never a belief in my abilities beyond the mediocre. He'd wanted me to be a dutiful daughter, to marry well, to stay close. My ambitions were an inconvenience, a disruption to his carefully ordered world. I am a genius, Papa, I said, the words surprising even myself with their force. The 17-year-old Nadia would never have dared. But the Nadia who had mastered 7 languages, who had navigated the treacherous currents of international diplomacy, who had died and come back. She had no room for false modesty. And I will get a scholarship. I will go to Oxford, and I will succeed. Mama finally turned, her eyes wide, a mixture of fear and something else. Was it a flicker of admiration? Nadia, please. This is not a discussion, Mama, I said, my voice softer but no less firm. This is my decision, my life. The confrontation hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. For days the apartment was a Cold War zone. Papa's stony silences, Mama's anxious sighs. But I held my ground. I mailed my applications, meticulously prepared, knowing they were far beyond what any other 17-year-old Russian girl could produce in 1997. I wrote about linguistic theories that hadn't been published yet, cited research that was still years away. It was a gamble, but it was a calculated one. Weeks later, a thin envelope arrived. Oxford letterhead. My hands shook as I tore it open. Dear Miss Petrov, it began, we are delighted to inform you. Full scholarship, full funding. My breath hitched. Tears welled in my eyes. Tears of relief, of triumph, of a future irrevocably altered. I walked into the kitchen, the letter clutched in my hand. Papa was there, reading his paper. Mama was darning socks. I placed the letter on the table in front of him. He read it slowly, his brow furrowed. Then he read it again. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something. Pride? Shock? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Well, he said, clearing his throat, don't expect us to visit. England is very far. It wasn't the apology I craved, not the validation I'd spent a lifetime yearning for, but it was acceptance, a grudging, reluctant acceptance. And for now, it was enough. I was going to Oxford. I was on my way. The divergence had begun. Oxford. The name itself was a symphony of academic promise, a hallowed institution steeped in centuries of tradition. Stepping onto the cobbled streets surrounded by the dreaming spires, I felt a thrill that even my 43-year-old cynicism couldn't dampen. Yet, despite having lived in the West before, in my previous life as a UN interpreter, the culture shock was surprisingly potent. Here, I wasn't just an observer. I was a participant, a 17-year-old girl navigating a world of privileged British teenagers. My adult mind, however, proved to be an invaluable asset. While my peers grappled with homesickness, adolescent angst, and the bewildering complexities of university social hierarchies, I moved with a quiet confidence that many mistook for aloofness. I knew how to read people, how to anticipate their reactions, how to navigate the subtle currents of power and influence. It was this maturity that drew Eliza to me. Eliza Cavendish, a whirlwind of blonde hair, boisterous laughter, and an impeccable aristocratic lineage. She was everything I wasn't: effortlessly charming, fabulously wealthy, and utterly unburdened by self-doubt. She found my Russian mystique, as she called it, fascinating. "You're not like the other freshers, Nadia," she'd declared one afternoon over tea and scones. "You actually think before you speak. It's rather refreshing." We became an unlikely pair, the reserved Russian scholar and the effervescent English Rose. Eliza, with her connections and social savvy, opened doors for me. I, in turn, offered her a perspective that challenged her privileged worldview. It was a genuine friendship, one I hadn't allowed myself in my previous life, always too focused on work, too guarded. Academically, I thrived. My linguistic abilities, honed over decades in my past life, were now supercharged by the youthful plasticity of my 17-year-old brain. I absorbed new information with astonishing speed. I met Professor Alistair Heinrich, a pioneer in psycholinguistics, whose work I'd admired from afar, or rather from the future. He was initially intrigued by my unconventional insights, the way I seemed to anticipate his theories. He quickly became my mentor, challenging me, pushing me, recognizing a spark in me that went beyond mere talent. "Your understanding of phonological adaptation is remarkable, Miss Petrov," he'd said after I presented a paper that, unbeknownst to him, was based on research that wouldn't be published for another 15 years. "It's as if you're seeing patterns no one else has perceived yet." The romantic attention from classmates was complicated. My mind was that of a 43-year-old woman, with all the emotional baggage and romantic history that entailed. My body, however, was that of a young woman, attracting the clumsy, earnest advances of boys who were, in my mental timeline, young enough to be my sons. I navigated these encounters with a polite detachment that some found intriguing, others frustrating. There was no room for romance in my meticulously crafted plan. Not yet. My primary focus was language. Not just acquiring it, but dissecting it, understanding its deepest structures, its connection to thought, to culture, to identity, and, most importantly, to accent. I remembered the humiliation of that UN conference room, the snickers that had, quite literally, killed me. That would not happen again. I began to develop my own approach to language acquisition, a synthesis of future knowledge and current linguistic theory. I knew the most effective techniques for accent reduction, methods that wouldn't be widely adopted for years. I practiced relentlessly, using specialized phonetic drills, recording and analyzing my own speech, meticulously shaping my pronunciation until my Russian accent was not just softened, but virtually undetectable. I could switch between a perfect received pronunciation, a flawless general American, and my native Russian, with an ease that astonished even Professor Heinrich. My voice was becoming a tool, an instrument I could tune to any pitch, any cultural context. It was my armor, my weapon, my key to the future I was determined to build. 5 years. 5 years of relentless work, of pushing the boundaries of my knowledge, of shaping myself into the person I needed to be. In 2002, I emerged from Oxford with a doctorate, honors, and a burgeoning reputation. My dissertation on phonological adaptation, a groundbreaking synthesis of my future knowledge and current research, sent ripples through the linguistic community. It wasn't just innovative, it was revolutionary. Offers started pouring in. Universities, research institutions, even private corporations, all eager to tap into this brilliant young mind. I accepted a position at a prestigious language institute in Geneva, a city that resonated with my past UN experiences, a hub of international diplomacy. Geneva, it felt like coming home in a strange, temporally displaced way. I reconnected with Eliza, who, true to her ambitious nature, was already making waves in the British diplomatic corps. She was stationed in Geneva, a rising star in her own right, and her network of contacts was invaluable. "Nadia, darling," she'd exclaimed, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and success. "You're the talk of the town. My colleagues are all clamoring to meet the linguistic prodigy who's going to solve all their communication problems." It was through Eliza at a glitzy diplomatic reception that I had my first encounter with Thomas Harrington, or rather, my second first encounter. Thomas Harrington, American, diplomat. Younger now, of course, his face unlined by the stress and cynicism that would later define him. But the arrogant tilt of his head, the dismissive curl of his lip, those were chillingly familiar. He'd been there, in that UN conference room, one of the smirking faces in the crowd that had witnessed my fatal humiliation. He didn't recognize me, of course. How could he? I was a different person now, physically and professionally. I was Dr. Nadia Petrov, the Oxford-educated linguist, not the flustered, accented interpreter. Eliza introduced us. "Thomas, this is Dr. Nadia Petrov. She's doing some absolutely fascinating work on language and cultural understanding." Harrington gave me a cursory glance, his eyes sweeping over me with an air of bored skepticism. "Dr. Petrov. Linguistics. Fascinating, I'm sure." He turned back to Eliza, clearly unimpressed. "Eliza, have you tried the canapes?" Simply divine. His dismissal, though expected, still stung. It was a stark reminder of the prejudices I was fighting against, the ingrained biases that saw my field, my expertise, as somehow frivolous. "Actually, Mr. Harrington," I said, my voice cool and precise, my English flawless, "my theories on linguistic nuance and diplomatic negotiation could prevent a great many misunderstandings, perhaps even a few international incidents." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Is that so?" He paused, then gave a condescending smile. "Well, Dr. Petrov, when you've managed to prevent a war with a well-placed adverb, do let me know." I met his gaze, my own unwavering. "I'll be sure to send you a memo." Walking away from him, a cold resolve settled in my heart. He didn't know it yet, but Thomas Harrington would play a significant role in my future. And this time, I would be the one in control. Geneva was a chessboard, and I was slowly, deliberately positioning my pieces. I recognized other faces from my previous UN career, younger versions of future colleagues and adversaries, all at earlier stages of their journeys. They were oblivious to my true identity, to the knowledge I held. I was a ghost from their future, walking among them, observing, planning. My star was rising, and I was determined to make it shine so brightly it would blind anyone who dared to underestimate me again. The next few years in Geneva were a blur of focused activity. I wasn't just building a reputation, I was forging an empire of intellect. My consultancy work flourished. Governments, multinational corporations, even intelligence agencies sought my expertise. I wasn't just a linguist, I was a cultural interpreter, a decoder of hidden meanings, a predictor of communicative friction. My true ace in the hole, however, was the translation software. Drawing on my memories of future technological advancements, I began to develop a program that was light years ahead of anything currently available. It didn't just translate words, it translated intent, nuance, cultural context. It learned, adapted, and predicted. It was my secret weapon, a product of a future they couldn't even imagine. I worked on it in secret, late at night in my small Geneva apartment, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face as I typed lines of code that were, in essence, whispers from tomorrow. My rapid ascent, predictably, did not go unnoticed, nor was it universally applauded. Claire Beaumont, a brilliant but fiercely territorial French linguist at a rival institute, became my unofficial nemesis. Claire was old guard, a purist who believed in the traditional painstaking methods of linguistic analysis. My innovative, tech-driven approach, my almost preternatural insights, she saw them as a threat, a charlatan's trick. Dr. Petrov's methods are unorthodox, she'd sniffed during a panel discussion, her gaze sharp and suspicious. Her success seems almost too rapid, too effortless. One wonders about the foundations of such a swift rise. Her skepticism was a constant thorn in my side, but it also served as a motivator. I knew she was watching, waiting for me to falter. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. My relationship with Thomas Harrington, meanwhile, evolved into a complex dance of professional antagonism and grudging respect. He was assigned as a liaison for several projects where the U.S. government sought my institute's expertise. Our interactions were initially frosty, marked by his ingrained skepticism and my cool professionalism. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. He witnessed firsthand the efficacy of my methods, the almost uncanny accuracy of my analyses. "I don't know how you do it, Petrov," he admitted one evening after a particularly grueling negotiation with a notoriously difficult delegation. A negotiation where my linguistic insights had broken a critical deadlock. "But you were right about everything." "I just understand language, Mr. Harrington," I replied, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. "And people." Flashbacks to my previous life became more frequent, sharper, more painful. The systemic discrimination I'd faced as an Eastern European woman in the male-dominated world of international diplomacy. The casual dismissals, the patronizing smiles, the constant need to prove myself, to be twice as good to get half the recognition. Those memories fueled my ambition, hardened my resolve. I wasn't just building a career, I was rectifying an injustice, rewriting a history that had ended in humiliation and death. Then came the call, the United Nations. A temporary consultancy project. A familiar path, a dangerous path. The irony was not lost on me. The institution that had, in a way, killed me, was now seeking my help. My software, still in its beta phase but already demonstrating its extraordinary capabilities, had come to their attention. A surprise diplomatic crisis was brewing between two minor nuclear powers. A situation eerily reminiscent of the one that had led to my death. My nascent software was touted as a potential game changer. My heart pounded as I considered the offer. Was this a trap? A cruel joke orchestrated by the universe? Or was it an opportunity? A chance to face my demons? To rewrite my own ending on the grandest stage of all? I took a deep breath. There was no question, really. I had to accept. The Geneva years had been about building my arsenal. Now, it was time to return to the battlefield. The year was 2008. The surprise diplomatic crisis, a territorial dispute simmering with nuclear undertones, had escalated with terrifying speed. Tensions were at breaking point. Traditional diplomatic channels were failing. And my software, my secret project, was thrust into the spotlight. It performed flawlessly, more than flawlessly. It deciphered layers of meaning in the delegates' communications that human interpreters, however skilled, had missed. It identified cultural sensitivities, predicted sticking points, and even suggested alternative phrasing that diffused tense moments. The negotiations, which had been teetering on the brink of collapse, were pulled back, slowly, painstakingly towards a resolution. My innovation hadn't just assisted, it had, by many accounts, saved the talks. The offer came swiftly after, a permanent position at the United Nations. Head of a newly formed department tasked with integrating advanced linguistic technologies into diplomatic communication. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. Some of the very same senior officials who, in my previous life, would have been among those snickering at my mispronunciation of hegemony, were now fawning over my brilliance, hailing me as a visionary. A maelstrom of emotions churned within me. Fear, yes. The UN building, the conference rooms, the hushed, important corridors, they were all haunted by the ghost of my past humiliation. But there was also a grim satisfaction, a sense of destiny. I was being drawn back to the very place, the very career that had destroyed me. Could I do it? Could I walk those halls again, knowing what I knew? Could I face the ghosts of my past and the future ghosts of those who would have mocked me? I made my decision. I would accept. But not as the Nadia Petrov of before, insecure and eager to please. I would return as Dr. Nadia Petrov, a force to be reckoned with. I wouldn't just navigate the system, I would change it from within. I would ensure that no other interpreter, no matter their accent or origin, would ever suffer the kind of casual cruelty that had ended my first life. My appointment was announced, and with it, another, less welcome development. Claire Beaumont, my old rival from Geneva, was also joining the UN, appointed to head a competing, more traditional translation department. Her skepticism of my methods had only deepened, her ambition undiminished. The stage was set for a new kind of conflict, a battle of old versus new, of tradition versus innovation, right in the heart of the UN. Thomas Harrington, now a more senior figure in the US delegation, was assigned as my primary diplomatic contact. Our relationship had thawed considerably since our initial encounters in Geneva. He had seen what I could do, and his respect, though sometimes grudging, was genuine. "Looks like we're stuck with each other, Petrov," he'd said, a rare hint of humor in his voice when he heard about my appointment. "Indeed, Harrington," I'd replied. "Try to keep up." I began my work immediately, my mind already racing ahead, drawing on my future knowledge. I started implementing changes to translation protocols, introducing new training modules, subtly laying the groundwork for the challenges I knew were coming. I was preparing for a future that only I could see, a future where linguistic precision and cultural understanding would be paramount, a future where the word hegemony would not be my undoing, but a stepping stone to something far greater. By 2015, I wasn't just a player at the UN, I was changing the game. As Director of Multilingual Communication, I had done more than just integrate technology. I had fundamentally altered the way the institution approached language. My department was a hub of innovation, efficiency, and most importantly, respect. The translation services were smoother, faster, and more nuanced than ever before. And the accent reduction programs I'd developed, discreetly of course, framed as advanced pronunciation and clarity workshops, were highly sought after. It was a delicious irony. Many of the diplomats, the aides, the attachés, who in that other lifetime would have been among the sniggering masses, now eagerly signed up for my courses. They sat before me, earnestly practicing vowel sounds and consonant clusters, oblivious to the fact that their future, former future, derision, had been the catalyst for my current expertise. I never let my amusement show, maintaining a professional, encouraging demeanor. But inside, a small, vindictive part of me savored the moment. My relationship with Thomas Harrington had deepened into something complex. The initial antagonism had long since given way to a grudging admiration, which had, in turn, blossomed into a genuine mutual respect. He was smart, dedicated, and beneath his cynical diplomat's exterior, surprisingly principled. We were a good team, our different strengths complementing each other. There was an undeniable attraction simmering beneath the surface, an unspoken tension that added another layer to our already intricate dynamic. We worked late, shared too many stale coffees in sterile UN offices, and occasionally, just occasionally, allowed glimpses of the people behind the professional masks. Claire Beaumont, however, remained a persistent thorn. Her department, clinging to traditional methods, was increasingly overshadowed by mine. Her resentment festered, manifesting in subtle digs, bureaucratic obstructionism, and insinuations that my methods, particularly my software, somehow favored certain countries or linguistic groups. Dr. Petrov's algorithms are a black box, she'd argue in committee meetings. How can we be sure of their impartiality? Transparency is paramount. I navigated these political landmines with the practiced ease of someone who knew the terrain and the future. I could anticipate Claire's attacks, preempt her arguments, and subtly turn her own tactics against her. It was a delicate game, but one I was well equipped to play. Yet a new unease began to creep in. The ethical dilemmas of my foreknowledge. Was it right to use this information, this unearned advantage, to advance my career, to settle old scores, however subtly? I was changing things, yes, but was I changing them for the better? Or was I simply creating a new set of unforeseen consequences? The weight of these questions grew heavier with each passing day. I was powerful, respected, even feared, but was I happy? Was this vengeance, however satisfying, truly fulfilling? The ghosts of my past, the laughter in that room, still echoed in my quieter moments. But now they were joined by new voices, new uncertainties. I was a power player, yes, but power, I was learning, came with its own unique set of burdens. It started with whispers, then murmurs, then an undeniable, chilling sense of déjà vu. The geopolitical climate was shifting, old tensions resurfacing, a familiar rhetoric of brinkmanship and suspicion. I recognized the signs, the subtle precursors to the very same nuclear crisis that had been the backdrop to my death. The players were slightly different, the specific grievances rephrased, but the underlying currents, the inexorable pull towards confrontation, it was all sickeningly familiar. My mind went into overdrive. I had to prepare. This time, I wouldn't be a mid-level interpreter, a hapless victim of circumstance and a poorly pronounced word. This time, I was in a position of power. I could influence events, shape the narrative, control the flow of information. I began to strategically deploy my resources, fine-tuning the translation software, briefing my team, subtly guiding the diplomatic discourse through the nuanced interpretation and communication strategies my department now championed. But the ethical struggle raged within me. Should I change history? I knew the disastrous potential of this summit if it followed its original course. My death had been a minor personal tragedy in the grand scheme of things. But the failure of those disarmament talks had led to a decade of heightened global instability, a new arms race, proxy wars that had cost thousands of lives. I had the power to prevent that. But what were the far-reaching consequences of such a monumental alteration? The butterfly effect. Could I, in averting one catastrophe, inadvertently trigger another, perhaps even worse? The responsibility was crushing. As if the universe had a twisted sense of dramatic timing, Thomas chose this moment to confess his feelings. It happened late one night after a particularly grueling preparatory meeting. We were alone in my office, the city lights twinkling far below. "Nadia," he began, his voice unusually hesitant. I can't keep pretending this is just professional." He looked at me, his eyes searching, vulnerable. "I have feelings for you, strong feelings." My carefully constructed composure faltered. His confession, so raw and unexpected, threw my already tumultuous emotions into further disarray. I had feelings for him, too, a genuine affection and a powerful attraction that I had ruthlessly suppressed. But now, with the weight of the world on my shoulders, with the specter of my past death looming? "Thomas," I began, my voice barely a whisper, "this is complicated." Before I could say more, Claire Beaumont chose her moment to strike. She'd been digging, I knew that. My rapid rise, my uncanny insights, my seemingly prescient understanding of linguistic trends, it had all been too much for her suspicious mind. She'd found inconsistencies, anomalies in my academic record, whispers of research that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Nothing concrete, but enough to cast a shadow of doubt. She presented her findings to a disciplinary committee, demanding an investigation into my credentials, my methods, my very integrity. And then, the final cruel twist. My parents announced they were coming to visit from Moscow. My father, his health failing, wanted to see me to see what his daughter had become. His approval, the validation I'd craved my whole life, both lives in fact, still eluded me. He'd never been able to truly express pride in my accomplishments. His praise always muted, qualified. Their visit, coinciding with the impending summit and Claire's accusations, felt like another layer of impossible pressure. The summit was scheduled, the date was announced, and my blood ran cold. It was the exact same date as my previous death. The universe wasn't just nudging me, it was screaming. The storm was no longer approaching. It was here, and I was standing directly in its path. The air in the main assembly hall was thick with a tension that was both familiar and terrifyingly new. Déjà vu washed over me in waves, so potent it made me sway. The same hushed anticipation, the same grim-faced delegates, the same high stakes. It was like watching a rerun of a nightmare, but this time, I wasn't a spectator. I was a key player. I recognized many of them, the diplomats who had, in another lifetime, been the audience to my demise. Younger versions, their faces less careworn, their cynicism not yet fully bloomed. But the arrogance, the casual sense of superiority, that was already there, lurking beneath the surface. They didn't know me, not this version of me. Dr. Nadia Petrov, Director of Multilingual Communication, was a figure of respect, even a little awe. The irony was a bitter pill. Just as the Russian foreign minister was about to deliver his opening statement, a side door opened, and Claire Beaumont swept in, an expression of grim triumph on her face. She wasn't even supposed to be in this room. She carried a thick dossier, and her eyes, when they met mine, were cold and hard. Mr. Secretary General, she began, her voice ringing with false concern, I apologize for this interruption, but a matter of utmost urgency has come to my attention. It concerns the integrity of our communication systems and specifically the credentials and methods of Dr. Nadia Petrov. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. All eyes turned to me. This was it, her carefully timed attack. She laid out her evidence. The inconsistencies in my academic timeline, the research papers that seemed to predate their own discovery, the uncanny accuracy of my software that defied conventional explanation. It was all circumstantial, of course, but presented with her venomous conviction, it sounded damning. The diplomatic tension in the room, already at a knife's edge, ratcheted up another 10 notches. Whispers erupted. Delegates exchanged uneasy glances. My carefully constructed world was threatening to crumble. Then, a voice cut through the rising chaos. This is outrageous! Thomas Harrington was on his feet, his face flushed with anger. Dr. Petrov is a woman of unimpeachable integrity and unparalleled expertise. Her contributions to this institution and to global diplomacy are immeasurable. These accusations are baseless, a pathetic attempt to derail these crucial talks by someone whose professional jealousy is clearly clouding her judgment. His defense was passionate, unequivocal. It stunned Claire into momentary silence. It sent a wave of warmth through my fear-chilled body. He believed in me. Truly believed in me. The Secretary General, a man whose political acumen was legendary, banged his gavel. Order! Order! Miss Beaumont, your concerns, however passionately presented, will be addressed through the appropriate channels at the appropriate time. This summit will proceed. Claire shot me a look of pure hatred before reluctantly retreating. But the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted. The atmosphere was even more poisonous than before. The Russian delegate began his speech. The words flowed, translated seamlessly by my team, by my software. The American delegate prepared his response. The debate intensified, and then the moment. The exact same point in the negotiations as before. The Russian delegate, his voice heavy with accusation, uttered the word hegemony. The American delegate looked to his team, then to the translation booth where I was now stationed, personally overseeing this critical exchange. All eyes in the room, it seemed, were on me, waiting. This was the word that had killed me, the word that had defined my failure, the word that now held the key to everything. My heart hammered against my ribs. My palms were slick with sweat. The ghosts of laughter echoed in my ears. Time seemed to slow. The weight of every eye in that room pressed down on me. The expectant hush, the barely concealed curiosity, the lingering traces of Claire's poison. This was my crucible. The word hung in the air, a challenge, a dare, hegemony. In my previous life, I'd fumbled it, my accent mangling the pronunciation, my confidence shattering. This time, I knew I could say it perfectly, flawlessly. But as I opened my mouth, a different idea, bold and audacious, sparked in my mind. Simply saying the word correctly wasn't enough. This wasn't just about linguistic accuracy, it was about something bigger. I took a breath, not of nervousness, but of resolve. Mr. Ambassador, I began, my voice clear, amplified by the microphone, carrying to every corner of the hall. My English was impeccable. The received pronunciation I'd painstakingly perfected. The Russian delegate refers to a perceived desire for hegemony. I pronounced the word with exquisite, almost exaggerated precision. A subtle emphasis, a slight pause. Then, instead of simply continuing with the translation, I did something unprecedented. I addressed the room directly. If I may, I said, my gaze sweeping across the faces of the assembled diplomats. This word, hegemony, like so many words in our diplomatic lexicon, carries with it a weight of history, of cultural perception. Its interpretation, its very pronunciation, can become a focal point for misunderstanding, a symbol of perceived power imbalances. A stunned silence. Interpreters didn't do this. We were supposed to be invisible, impartial conduits. Language, I continued, my voice gaining strength, is not merely a tool for conveying information. It is a reflection of our cultures, our biases, our fears. When we fail to acknowledge this, when we allow linguistic differences to become barriers rather than bridges, we risk not just miscommunication, but mistrust. I could feel Thomas's eyes on me, a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. Claire Beaumont looked like she was about to spontaneously combust. In my years of work, I went on, now directly addressing the core of the tension in the room, I have seen how easily a misconstrued phrase, an unacknowledged cultural nuance, even a perceived slight in pronunciation, can derail the most critical negotiations. We focus on the grand strategies, the political maneuvers, but we often neglect the very foundation upon which all diplomacy is built, the ability to truly hear and to be truly heard with respect and understanding. Then, drawing on my unique foreknowledge, I began to subtly weave in references, not to past events, but to their future actions, their future legacies, things they couldn't possibly know I knew. I spoke of a potential trade agreement that Ambassador Dubois, who looked startled, would champion in 3 years, a humanitarian crisis that Minister Chen, now paling slightly, would successfully navigate in 5, a scientific collaboration that Dr. Schmidt, his jaw-dropping, would initiate that would benefit all their nations. I wasn't predicting the future. I was speaking of their potential, their better angels, subtly reminding them of the shared future they were jeopardizing. My impromptu speech, a blend of linguistic philosophy and eerily specific, to them, foresight, shifted the atmosphere in the room. Claire's accusations, moments before so damaging, now seemed petty, irrelevant. My insights, demonstrated in real time, were proving invaluable. The delegates were no longer just looking at an interpreter. They were looking at someone who understood them, perhaps better than they understood themselves. The tension didn't vanish, but it transformed. The hard edges softened. A space for dialogue, for genuine communication had been opened. The summit, which had been teetering on the brink of collapse, found a new path. The negotiations continued, but with a different tone, a greater willingness to listen, to understand. By the end of the day, a breakthrough. Not a full resolution, but a commitment to de-escalation, a framework for further talks. A far more positive outcome than the disastrous collapse of my previous life. Thomas found me afterwards as the hall was emptying. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, awe, confusion, and something else, something deeper. "Nadia," he said, his voice hushed. "What was that? How did you know those things?" I met his gaze, a weary smile touching my lips. "It's a long story, Thomas." And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was a story I was finally ready to tell. The aftermath of the summit was a strange cocktail of exhaustion and exhilaration. The UN was buzzing. My impromptu speech, my intervention, as some were calling it, was the talk of the diplomatic world. I was no longer just Dr. Nadia Petrov, Director of Multilingual Communication. I was something more, something undefined, something slightly unsettling to the established order. The weight of my secret, however, had become unbearable. I'd carried it for so long, a solitary burden. But Thomas had stood by me. He had defended me against Claire's attack, his belief in me unwavering even when the evidence seemed to point to something strange, something inexplicable. He deserved the truth, or at least as much of the truth as I dared to reveal. I invited him to my apartment a few days later, not the sterile, impersonal space of my UN office, but my home, a small haven of calm I'd created for myself. "There's something I need to tell you, Thomas," I began, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "Something you're going to find very hard to believe." He listened patiently, his expression serious as I told him. Not everything, not yet, but enough. I told him about the first life, the humiliation, the aneurysm. I told him about waking up 17 again with all my memories intact. I showed him my childhood diary, the entry from September 12, 1997, the day my second chance began. I showed him early drafts of linguistic theories I'd developed at Oxford, theories that wouldn't be published by others for years. I even, heart-pounding, logged into a secure server and showed him the early rudimentary code for my translation software, dated years before such technology was considered feasible. His initial reaction was, predictably, disbelief. He paced the room, running a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and concern. "Nadia, this is insane. Are you saying you're from the future, that you've lived this all before? Not exactly from the future, I corrected gently. More like a life repeated, with knowledge of how it played out the first time. He stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto mine. The summit. Those things you said about Dubois, Chen, Schmidt. You knew those things because you'd already seen them happen? I nodded. Fascination began to replace the disbelief in his eyes. Then, a dawning concern. The implications. Nadia, if this is true, how much have you changed? What are the consequences? I don't know, I admitted, the honesty raw and painful. I've tried to make things better, to prevent disasters I knew were coming. But every change, however small, creates ripples. I live with that uncertainty every day. We talked for hours, late into the night. He asked 1,000 questions, probing, testing, trying to reconcile this impossible truth with the woman he thought he knew. And slowly, painstakingly, he began to believe. The evidence was too compelling, my conviction too absolute. A few days later, Claire Beaumont requested a meeting. She looked smaller somehow, her usual sharp edges softened by a weary humility. Dr. Petrov, Nadia, she began, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. I owe you an apology. My accusations, they were unprofessional, unfounded. I let my insecurities get the better of me. Your performance at the summit, it was extraordinary. You have a gift, a true gift. And I was too blind, too jealous to see it. It wasn't the groveling apology some part of me might have craved, but it was genuine. And surprisingly, it brought a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Apology accepted, Claire, I said. And for the first time, I saw not a rival, but a fellow professional, flawed and ambitious, much like myself. The most difficult conversation was yet to come. My parents. Their visit was strained. My father, frailer now, his disapproval still a heavy cloak around him. But during one quiet afternoon as Mama bustled in the kitchen, I found myself telling him about the summit, about the small part I had played. I didn't mention the rebirth, of course, just the work, the challenges, the quiet triumphs. He listened, his gaze fixed on some distant point. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then, he cleared his throat. You did well, Nadia, he said, his voice raspy. Your mother and I, we are proud of you. Tears pricked my eyes. The words I'd waited a lifetime, 2 lifetimes to hear. So simple, so profound. It wasn't a grand absolution, but it was enough. A crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. Later that week, Thomas came to me with a proposal. Nadia, he said, taking my hands, what you have, this knowledge, this perspective, it's too important to keep hidden, but you can't carry it alone. Let me help you. Let's work together, professionally and personally. His eyes were full of an emotion that mirrored my own. A partnership, a new path. Not one of solitary struggle, but of shared purpose, shared hope. I looked at him, at the future stretching before us, uncertain, yes, but no longer terrifyingly alone. Yes, Thomas, I whispered, yes. A year passed, a year of quiet consolidation, of building on the foundations I had laid. The Linguistic Equity Initiative, my brainchild, was now a reality, a UN-backed program dedicated to ensuring that all voices, regardless of accent or origin, were treated with respect in diplomatic settings. It was my quiet revolution, a direct response to the humiliation that had ended my first life. Thomas was my rock, my confidant, my partner in every sense of the word. His political acumen and my unique insights made us a formidable team. We navigated the treacherous currents of international diplomacy with a synergy that was both effective and, to many, slightly unnerving. Claire Beaumont, surprisingly, had become an ally. Her apology had been genuine, and once her professional jealousy had receded, her sharp intellect and deep understanding of traditional linguistic structures proved to be a valuable counterpoint to my more unconventional methods. We even co-authored a paper on cross-cultural communication that was causing a stir in academic circles. But the secret of my rebirth still gnawed at me. It was a chasm between me and the world, a truth so profound, so altering, that it cast a shadow over all my interactions. I had told Thomas, and my father had, in his own way, offered a form of reconciliation. But what about the others? What about the 27 diplomats whose laughter had rung in my ears as I died? The opportunity came during a high-level diplomatic training seminar, part of my linguistic equity initiative. Many of them were there younger, of course, than they had been on that fateful day, but their faces, their mannerisms, were seared into my memory. They were my students now, ironically enough, learning from the woman whose accent they would have mocked. During a session on predictive modeling and diplomatic communication, a topic I'd carefully chosen, I let it slip. A piece of information so specific, so undeniably prescient, that it couldn't be dismissed as a lucky guess or a brilliant deduction. I spoke of a minor internal political shift in a small, relatively insignificant nation, a shift that wouldn't become public knowledge for another 48 hours. I presented it as a hypothetical, a case study. The reaction was immediate, a ripple of unease. Sidelong glances, furrowed brows. One of them, a French diplomat named Dubois, the same man whose future trade deal I'd predicted at the summit, voiced the question that was on everyone's mind. Dr. Petrov, he began, his voice hesitant. That is, a remarkably specific hypothetical, almost too specific. How could you possibly? The moment had come. I took a deep breath. Thomas, who was co-facilitating the seminar, gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. Gentlemen, Madam Ambassador, I began, my voice calm, my gaze sweeping across their faces, meeting each of their eyes in turn. What I am about to tell you will stretch the very limits of your credulity, but it is the truth. And then I told them everything. The first life, the mispronounced word, the laughter, the aneurysm, the awakening. The 17-year-old girl with 43 years of memories. I laid it all bare, the absurdity, the impossibility, the undeniable reality of my experience. The reactions were a kaleidoscope of human emotion. Disbelief, stark and absolute on some faces. Fear, a primal, visceral fear in the eyes of others. And on a few, a dawning, almost childlike fascination. You are saying, a British diplomat, one of the more notorious snickerers from my past memory, stammered, that we laughed you to death? In a manner of speaking, yes, I replied, my voice devoid of accusation, simply stating a fact. Your mockery, in that moment of extreme stress, was the trigger. Thomas stepped forward, his presence a solid bulwark of support. I know this is a lot to process, but I have seen the evidence. I have worked with Nadia for years. What she says, however incredible it may sound, is true. The room was silent, the air thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of a revelation that shattered their understanding of reality. They were no longer just diplomats, colleagues, students. They were men and women confronted with the ghost of a future they had unknowingly participated in, a future that had, for one woman, already come to pass. The days that followed the revelation were surreal. The select group of diplomats who had been present at the training session grappled with the impossible truth I had laid before them. Disbelief warred with a creeping, undeniable sense of awe, and for some, a profound, disquieting guilt. They were being asked to reckon with actions they hadn't yet committed, with a cruelty they hadn't yet displayed, at least not in this timeline. One by one, they came to me. Not in a formal delegation, but individually, hesitantly. The apologies were awkward, heartfelt, and deeply, profoundly strange. Dr. Petrov. Nadia, Dubois, the Frenchman, began, his usual Gallic confidence replaced by a humbled uncertainty. If what you say is true, and I find myself, against all logic, believing it, then I am truly sorry, for the man I would have been, for the pain I would have caused. Another, the British diplomat whose past future laughter had been particularly cutting, looked physically ill. I don't know what to say. To think that we could have been so casually cruel. It's monstrous. The supreme irony, of course, was that I was often asked to interpret these apologies, to translate their stunned, remorseful words from their native tongues into English, or Russian, or French, for the benefit of others in the room if these encounters happened in small groups. I, Nadia Petrov, the woman whose accent they would have mocked, was now the conduit for their contrition over that very mockery. The universe, it seemed, had a very peculiar sense of humor. My father, frail but resolute, insisted on attending one of these informal sessions. He sat quietly in the corner, watching as these powerful, accomplished men and women stumbled through their apologies to his daughter. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes then. Not just pride, but a fierce, protective anger on my behalf, an emotion I'd never seen from him before. It was, in its own way, another form of healing. Claire Beaumont, surprisingly, became an unexpected pillar of support. Her analytical mind, once my greatest adversary, now worked to corroborate my story. She delved into archives, cross-referenced timelines, found obscure academic papers that hinted at theories I'd developed years before their time. She couldn't prove my rebirth, of course, but she could and did provide a mountain of circumstantial evidence that made my incredible claim less incredible. "It defies logic," she'd said to me, a rare smile gracing her lips. "But then, Nadia, so do you." The ethical implications were, of course, enormous. Was it fair to hold people accountable for actions they hadn't yet committed in this timeline? Was their remorse genuine, or simply a product of fear and disbelief? These were questions we debated, Thomas and I, late into the night. There were no easy answers. For me, the apologies, however strange their genesis, brought a sense of closure. Not a forgetting, but a letting go. The rage, the humiliation, the bitterness that had fueled me for so long, it began to dissipate, replaced by a weary, profound understanding. I had sought revenge, in a way, and I had found it, not in their downfall, but in their dawning awareness, in their forced confrontation with their own capacity for casual cruelty. But with that closure came a new, heavier responsibility. My foreknowledge was no longer just a tool for personal advancement or for averting disaster. It was a mirror, reflecting back to humanity its best and worst potentials. And I, Nadia Petrov, was its reluctant keeper, 5 years later. The world had not become a utopia. Tensions still flared, crises still erupted. But things were different, subtly, significantly different. The Linguistic Equity Initiative, born from my own pain, had become a global standard, fostering a new level of respect and understanding in diplomatic discourse. Accents were no longer seen as marks of otherness, but as badges of identity, each voice valued for its unique perspective. Thomas and I were married. His pragmatism and political savvy kept me grounded in the present, a vital anchor against the sometimes overwhelming currents of my foreknowledge. Our partnership was a testament to the power of shared purpose, a quiet force for positive change in a world that desperately needed it. My friendship with Claire Beaumont had blossomed into a true collaboration. Together, we pushed the boundaries of cross-cultural communication research. Our combined strengths, her traditional rigor, my unconventional insights, creating a synergy that was both productive and deeply fulfilling. My father passed away peacefully 2 years after the revelation. In his final months, the wall between us had finally crumbled. He spoke of his regrets, his unspoken pride, his belated understanding of the daughter he had never truly known. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was real, and it was enough. The date of my original death, that fateful day in the UN conference room, still came around each year, but it was no longer a day of dread. Now, it was a day of quiet celebration, a private anniversary marked with Thomas and the small circle of friends and colleagues who knew my secret. A reminder of a life almost lost, and a second chance miraculously gained. Was my rebirth chance? A miracle? A glitch in the cosmic matrix? I still didn't know, perhaps I never would. But I had learned to live with the mystery, to embrace the uncertainty. In my office at the UN, I now had a new photograph on my desk. Not of some long-dead diplomat or a sterile cityscape. It was a photo of a young woman, an intern in my department, her face bright with intelligence, her English heavily accented with the musical lilt of her native Senegal. I saw her earlier today, struggling slightly during a practice translation, her brow furrowed with the same anxiety I had once known so intimately. I'd walked over to her, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Your voice is clear, Amina, I'd said, my own voice, the one I had so painstakingly perfected, now carrying a different kind of authority, the authority of empathy, of shared experience. Your perspective is valuable. Never let anyone tell you that the way you speak makes what you say any less important. Your accent is not a barrier. It is a part of who you are, and it deserves to be heard with respect. A smile had broken out on her face, a smile of relief, of gratitude, of dawning confidence. And in that moment, I knew. This was why I had come back. Not for revenge, not for power, not even for personal redemption, but for this. To ensure that other voices, in all their rich and varied cadences, would never be silenced by laughter, by prejudice, by the casual cruelty of a world that too often feared what it did not understand. My new future, the one I had forged from the ashes of my past, was just beginning. And it was a future filled with the promise of a million different voices, all speaking their truth, all being heard.